Breaking news! That isn't so breaking or news because I've been busy writing a thesis, but now I'm back and lots of news has happened I need to catch up with. All the kits have been released, or re-released as is the case with lots of the temporarily out of stock TM units now coming back into stock in nice shiny new boxes, some of which then to go immediately out of stock again. But that's not the point. We have a complete game, except for the detachment slots we're still missing. But I'm getting carried away now with provisos and disclaimers. The point is that we now know how much everything costs. With the optimum game size being 3,000 points, according to Games Workshop, many websites and channels, including my own, have bemoaned how expensive putting together an army for this game is. Yes, I know it's a luxury hobby and you get more hours entertainment out of a box and some paint than you do the equivalent of film or theatre or Lego, etc. But still, in this 3D printing world, a channel such as mine that strives to follow traditional army building and kit bashing needs to know exactly how expensive it can be, or more accurately, how cheap it can be. So what I've done is I've taken every single box currently on sale and used some Excel-based math magics to create the ultimate guide of Legions Imperialis PPP. That's points per pound. Which boxes have the most PPP? Which have the least? How do we make sure you're getting the most P for your P, or B for your B if you're American? Well, look no further than the following expression of hyperfixation, after the boom explodey intro, of course. So, where was I? Yes. I'll be starting at the worst value boxes and building up to the best. And then I'll finish with breaking down each army list. And then an example 3,000 point list built as cheap as possible. So skip to the end if you're interested in that. Once this is rendered, I'll put timestamps in the description. I'll also put the full unedited spreadsheet on my Patreon on the free tier if anyone fancies signing up for that. Or sign up for a not-so-free tier if you want to support more nonsense like this, and be eligible for goodie giveaways when they're not being returned to sender because some reason post office. Anyway, by my count, there are 60-ish different boxes available. I say ish because the different Reaver and Warhound loadouts are different boxes despite being the same detachment with the same PPP, so I've grouped them together along with a few other similar boxes. But still, 58-ish different values worth sorting. I'll only be sorting by points value, not mass of plastic included. Generally speaking, the LI boxes are pretty consistently priced per plastic, or PPP. No, not that. Anyway, with one major exception, I'll point out when we get there. But points-wise, it's all over the bloody place. Also note that this doesn't take into account how valuable those points are worth. A point of Drop Pod or War Master is undoubtedly worth more than a point of Cerastus Lancer. That's all list building and tactics. This is just how cheap can I get an army on the table. For that same reason, I'll be ordering these by the most points you can squeeze out of a box, taking the most expensive composition possible from each, but will also include the minimum possible for context. For the sake of maths, I'll be using Games Workshop RRP in GBP, as generally speaking, exchange rates and local store discounts will scale consistently with this, so should still work out in the same order. Also bear in mind that a single tank per armoured auxiliary company can be a commander for plus 10 points, which I won't be including, but may tip it for your taste buds. Anyway, without further ado, and starting at the bottom. To no one's surprise, except this guy, the worst value box is the Astartes drop pods. If you build them all as Deathstorm drop pods, which if you're up to date with competitive lingo is considered a very silly thing to do, and they're only 2.03 points per pound. If you build them all as transports, the far more sensible thing to do for army building, and you're looking at a frankly ridiculous 0.76 PPP. For context, the only other option offering less than 1 PPP are the Dreadnought drop pods built as transports. And even then it's better than this. Beautiful models, great for gaming, very poor value for army building. If anything is an argument for 3D printing, it's these guys. Basic transports generally don't do very well on PPP. As next in line, we have Arbuslighters at 3.05 PPP. And then Rhinos at 3.17 base, but with the included options, you can squeeze it up to 3.81 if you equip 2 with missiles, which you should, and 4 with melters, which you shouldn't. And to give you context for how silly these values are, better value than all of these is the Astartes in the starter box. That's right, not proportionately, not including the Titans and Solar, not assuming you can sell the spares, not even minusing the cost of the book. If you bought the starter box at RRP for just the Astartes model, read 1 box of infantry and half a box of each of the battle tanks, then that still would be better PPP than the transport so far. But in case it's not obvious, don't buy the starter just for the Astartes. Buying an infantry box and a whole box of each of the 2 tanks is only 2/3 of the price with double the PPP, so do that instead. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Next is the Dreadnought drop pod kit, which, as mentioned, is less than a point per pound if built as transport. But build them as Palisade pods and they work out as 4.06 PPP, which is a little better than what's come before and also not as silly an option competitively as the Death Storm. Carrying on, we have a couple of the resin plastic combo kits for Auxilia flyers. The Marauder Colossus and Pathfinders are both 4.1 PPP. Then, the worst value Space Marine flyer is the Thunderhawk. Being unique as a 2-sprue £31.50 kit that contains only 1 model, even though that model is a beast, this only works out as being 4.76 PPP. And again, for context, the next best value is buying the starter box just for the Auxilia half. Again, don't do this, that would be silly. The resin armigers are next at the exact same PPP, 4.93, which is the worst value Legion support option and also the kit most likely to be plasticified soon in my mind, so in any case I'd avoid these unless you absolutely love the current resin kit. And next we have buying the starter just for the Warhounds. Again, don't do that, you can get a box of 2 Warhounds for 1/3 of the price with the much better PPP and much better weapon options. But even that, we're moving up a tier to the kits that are better than 5 points per pound. That's more than 5 times better value than drop pods built as transports. So next we have the Marauder Bombers at 5.4 PPP, and then the slightly better Thunderbolt Fighters at 5.46, if you take all the optional weapon extras. We then have the more Mechanicum-y armigers, the Moirax at 5.48, and the Solo Resin Acastus Asterius at 5.68. Marauder Destroyers are slightly better than their bomber friends at 6.03, also being the first kit to break the 6 PPP barrier. And the worst value non-transport tanks are the Auxilia Super Heavies, the Baneblade kit, at maximum 6.35 PPP. Fire Raptors hit the exact same maximum PPP, 6.35, more than 1.5 PPP, but better value than their big Thunderhawk brother. Now, at the exact same PPP as the Fire Raptors are the Storm Eagles, but here's where I point out something very annoying. Fire Raptors are 1 flyer per sprue. So for a £31.50 kit, they match the exact same pricing structure as everything else in the range, and I mean everything else. With no silly character tax or single clan packs, the LI boxes are very consistently priced. 1 sprue is £23, 2 sprues are £31.50, 3 is £47.5, etc. Everything, even the Titans, follow this pattern, with allowances for the resin bits costing a bit more. Everything follows this pricing pattern except the Storm Eagles. Storm Eagles are 2 per sprue and you only get 1 A5 sprue in the box. For the same price as all the rest of the 2 sprue kits, and for the life of me, I cannot see why. For context, you get 6 Xiphons in a pack. We're not there yet, but they're in the top 5 best value kits with 2 sprues at £31.50. Yet here's the Storm Eagles with only 1 sprue at £31.50. It's genuinely bizarre, and it's the only kit I'd say is objectively bad value, because it breaks LI's basic pricing structure. I can only assume no one complained about this back in the days of Aeronautica, because everyone had enough from all the starter sets, so it was never an issue. But I foresee this being an issue now, or in the context of Legions Imperialis, and it should be an issue. Paying £31.50 and opening up a single A5 sprue is silly. Again, I know it's a luxury hobby, and model-wise it's similar to the Fire Raptors, but without all the fun guns, still. Anyway, back to the PPP. Stormhammers, taken individually, can squeeze 6.6 PPP, and Sakarans in 2 groups of 2 just edge them out with 6.67. The only Resin Bits Titan box, the Warlord Sinister, becomes our worst value Titan at only 6.82, a value it shares almost exactly with the Warmaster Gun version, rounding to the same significant figures. However, the Iconoclast version can upgrade its claw for 10 points, so you can squeeze an extra 0.9 PPP out of that version. However, the gun version is still better, and in spite of being the worst value Titan PPP-wise, it is undoubtedly the best in terms of stats per point. So I'm definitely not saying don't use it, just be aware it will be a money sink. Predator tanks, newly released in 3s, can net you 7.3 PPP, and Land Raiders and Dracosans start the trend for better value transport options at
7.94
and
8.00
PPP, respectively, if given all their options. We then have a couple more relatively bad value Titans. The Warlord kits and the Warbringer Nemesis only net you 8.11 and 8.30 PPP, respectively. Then is our first infantry box, and officially the worst value infantry box in spite of how nice the models are. The Astartes Fast Attack can squeeze 8.38 PPP with missile pods on all the javelins. Continuing with infantry, and continuing with Astartes, the Astartes infantry box can be stretched to 8.49 PPP if we take the 2 base support squads as half of a 4 base support slot. But if built only by the box, with the 2 bases being attached to a tactical squad, as upgrades, it goes all the way down to 7.49 PPP. Then we have the Auxilia infantry at slightly better value if stretched at 8.76, with all support bases as their own slot, or slightly worse than the Astartes at 6.73 PPP if used as tertio upgrades. Astartes support box comes next, which can be stretched to 8.76 PPP, the same as the Auxilia infantry. Then we have a brief sojourn from infantry for some more tanks. The fancy versions of the Malcador run you at 8.89, as does the Auxilia artillery box, if you build them as basilisks, the more expensive option. The Kratos, which, if taken in minimum strength units, can net you 9.52 PPP. The Cerastus Atropos kit, in spite of being resin, nets you 9.89 PPP, and is also probably the best Cerastus loadout competitively. Now we reach the big guns. Everything from now on nets you more than 10 points per pound. If you want to get units on the table in as few paydays as possible, this is where we really start looking. And again, amazingly, we start with some resin. Styrex and Magaira Knights both net you 10.13 PPP, as well as being very, very sexy models. I can't speak for their use in game, but they look pretty and are relatively good value points-wise, especially for resin, especially compared to the resin Knights. The Reaver Titan is next, with both variants hitting 10.38 PPP. Please note that some weapons with Engine Killer may have a surcharge if playing Titan Death, but at 6,000 points values, this list doesn't consider that. Avenger Strike Fighters are next. If taken individually, 10.79 PPP. Do note, though, that these and other flyers still to come, that flyer slots are very few and far between, even in the dedicated flyer detachments. So in theory, you can get 10.79 PPP if you had enough formations. But even at the most efficient PPP, these guys are netting you 9.68. So the smaller flyers are big bang for their buck, or BBFB. No. Spartans are officially the best value transports at 11.05 PPP if given all their optional guns, and Leman Russ, as well as being a very competitive option in terms of tanks, come out very well for price, being at 11.11 PPP if taken in minimum strength units. Next we get the first big solo box, the Astartes Battle Group, available while stocks last, and they are still available, so stocks are presumably lasting. So for an impressive 11.16 PPP, pick one up while you can, Astartes players. Heck, pick 2 up. Even better value, however, are the units in the Auxilia support box, which can be squeezed to give 12.32 PPP. Jumping up to 13.21 points per pound are the vanilla Malcadors. And then we get the Auxilia big box, on paper slightly better value than the Astartes version, though not by much, at 13.33 PPP. Beating them out still are the plastic Acastus Knights, giving 13.51, and the Warhound boxes each net you 13.89. Next is the Stalwart Starter Box, which would be 14.11 PPP if it were possible to use every single model in a 3k army, which it isn't quite. So in practice, it will be less than this, but still pretty good. It's not the most competitive, but as everyone will likely be starting with a starter box, it's well worth considering. Next we get to the best value Auxilia flyers, the Lightnings. With the same disclaimer as the Avengers, you could squeeze 16.19 points per pound out of these, but more likely, they're still respectable and would still be next on the list, 15.08. Now we're on 15 PPP plus, PPPP, if you will. Direwolves are next at 16.21. And as we enter the top 5 kits, it's the Titanicus box with its whopping 4 Titans, 2 Knights, getting you 17.45 PPP, even discounting all the rulebooks and other gubbins. However, this is almost 2,000 points of Legion support and Knight households. At 3k, you'd only be able to use 900 points of that. So for collectors and variety and Titan Death, and of course Titanicus itself, it's an amazing box. For cheap 3,000 point Legion Imperialis, unfortunately it's not viable. Xiphons, however, are. Putting the Storm Eagles to shame, 6 individual interceptors are getting you an incredible 18.10 PPP. Even in a group of 4 and 2, which is the most efficient you can arrange them, that's 15.56. If you're looking for cheap flyers, these are the go-to, and they're well worth considering competitively too. Now we reach the top 3, and they are all Knights. And they're all excellent kits aesthetically, though only one is arguably competitive. And even then, not really compared to some of the bigger Titan options. But still, the Knights win out on points per pound. And they are, in 3rd place, the new Cerastus mixed 4-pack, with 2 sword wielders and 2 rat-a-tat-tat versions. £47.50 nets you up to 860 points worth of Knights. That's 18.11 points per pound. In 2nd place, and arguably the most competitive option, the Cerastus Lancer, which is also our cheapest box at only 1 sprue. Still looking at you, Storm Eagle. You know what you did. £23 gets you 2 Knights for up to 430 points. 18.70 PPP if taken as 2 individuals. And in 1st place, a kit only £28, consisting of 1 A5 sprue and a smaller upgrade sprue. The undisputed GOAT of either PPP or massively being overcosted, the Questoris Knights. 3 Knights, if taken individually, with a missile pod on top and a big fist in place of their chainsword, gets you a whopping 561 points of Knight, breaking our final barrier at over 20 points per pound. This same loadout taken as a 3 still gets you 541 points, 19.32 PPP, still beating the maximum PPP of the Cerastus duo. Even at their cheapest basic loadout, group of 3, the Questoris trio gets you 520 points and only barely loses out to the most expensive way to field the Cerastus kit at 18.57 PPP. So, that was fun. What does that look like in practice? For each army, the points per pound value looks like this. Interestingly, despite the Astartes' supposed eliteness compared to their mortal brethren, it looks like they can't hold a candle to points efficiency. So if you are planning an Astartes army, focusing on Xiphons and battle groups is the way forward, maybe with some extra Spartans to support your battle group rhinos. But if we're looking for the cheapest 3,000 point army we can, the Solar are the way to go. If you don't plan on getting a starter set, filling out your 900 points of allies with a mix of the Knight kits is the way to go, even though the Questoris are the most points costy, because they have 520 points minimum, you won't be able to pair these with any other kit without going over your 900 and wasting money and points. So if you're not buying the starter set, get 2 of the Cerastus Lancer box and run them individually for 860 points, basically taking you up to your allowance for only £44. But with the box as an option that essentially nets you a free rulebook and all the other gubbins, let's see what we can do with and without it. Here is a list that's very almost exactly 3,000, and it costs £266.50. 11.26 PPP, not counting the leftovers. It consists of the starter box, an auxiliary battle group, and 1 box of lightning fighters. However, it does leave you with quite a lot spare which you won't need or be able to use in the 3K, especially all the Space Marine tanks. It also leaves you with some strike fighters, a couple of odd infantry and walkers. So can we do better and more efficiently without the starter box? Yes, with the battle group, lightning fighters and 2 Cerastus Lancer Knight boxes, a total of £187.50 gets you 2,719 points, meaning any £31.50 box can then take you up to 3k to depending on what you fancy. For example, a second box of Lightning Fighters, meaning if you're not locked into the starter box, you can get 3,000 points for only £219 RRP, which is a points per pound of 13.7 overall, with only the rapiers left over as spare. As per this example list, you won't need templates with this list. So if you buy a digital rulebook for £25, you're well under the 266 version, and even if you buy the £40 physical book, you're still more efficient, albeit with fewer spare models to play with. So, if you want cheap models on the table, this is what I'd recommend. Whilst it might not be the most competitive, 12 Flyers is certainly not to be sniffed at, and that Pioneer company could well come in clutch. And at around £200 at RRP for a full 3K, that's not bad at all from a Warhammer point of view. At 28mm, it's about £200 per 1,000 points in a very list of 30k or 40k. If using a friendly local discount of 10 to 20%, you could be looking at closer to £160 for a full 3,000 point army. I'm sure with some pernickety rearrangement, you might be able to scrape a couple more decimals worth of PPP, but given you'll be rounding once you reach about 3,000 anyway, it looks like this is the ballpark we're working with. And it's a pleasant surprise when I consider how much I spend on each wave of Tyranids and Genestealer cults. Anyway, I hope you've had fun with this little experiment, and it feels good to have a basically complete game to play. Here's to the next expansion. Talon is on the horizon. Here's hoping we get more kits like the Little Plastic Knights, and fewer kits like the Drop Pods and those nasty, horrible Storm Eagles. Go away. Thank you to my sexy Patreons. We'd love it if you came to join our private chats on the Patreon app. If we get enough of you, might even start a Discord. Who knows? Anyway, like and subscribe. Peace and love. And please keep on lip bashing.